Hi, my name's Sam from WTM Sydney, and today I want to talk about the text on the front cover of this booklet. This booklet is a transcript of a 2020 radio interview between Australian biologist Jeremy Griffith and British actor and commentator Craig Conway. So what I had in mind to do was just to read out the text that's on the cover and then just talk to it a little bit and I suppose express some of my thoughts about particularly just how self-contained it is. Yes, it's got some bold and provocative, if you like, claims, but for me what's interesting is how if you actually stop and look a little bit more closely at what is set out, there is actually a sound and logical basis for what's set out on the text of the cover. So anyway, first of all, I'll just read what's included and try and give emphasis as is reflected, and then talk a little bit about it. So kicking off, it reads, "The interview that solves the human condition and saves the world!" exclamation mark. And I should note the word "the" is in all caps uppercase for emphasis. It then includes a quote, or the following quote I should say, "The most important interview of all time," quote. Professor Harry Prosen, former president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association. Then just obviously identifies who's involved, as I just mentioned, biologist Jeremy Griffith, interviewed by Craig Conway. The transcript of acclaimed British actor and broadcaster Craig Conway's astonishing, world-changing and world-saving 2020 interview with Australian biologist Jeremy Griffith about his book, Freedom, the End of the Human Condition, which presents the completely redeeming, uplifting and healing understanding of the core mystery and problem about human behaviour, of our so-called good and evil stricken human condition, thus ending all the conflict and suffering in human life at its source and providing the now urgently needed roadmap for the complete rehabilitation and transformation of our lives and world. So that's the text that's on the front cover of this booklet, the interview. And if you like, it's sort of divided into these three main parts. You've got the title, this quote from the late Professor Harry Prosen, and some commentary at the bottom. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about each of those three elements. In terms of just starting with the title, and in particular the first line, it reads in uppercase, "The interview." So obviously enough, it's putting forward in a very direct fashion that this interview does something that no other interview does, that it actually does something unique, that it stands apart. So it's being, if you like, very direct about the significance or importance of this interview and the implications, or the far-reaching implications of what it is suggesting it has actually achieved. And then as we go into the second line, it reads, "that solves the human condition and saves the world." And so in that sense, it's defining for me, the domain or the realm of what it is that it's done that elevates it in terms of its importance. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about, in particular, the use of the word solves and a couple of the elements for me that are significant in that. And I suppose firstly is that by using the word solves, it's suggesting that this issue of the human condition, and that's defined a little bit more down in the commentary, is that this issue of the human condition is something that can be made sense of. There's an emphasis on making sense or understanding or explanation, and that it is, if you like, a mystery or a riddle or a dilemma or an issue that actually can be solved. And if you like, that sits along or is in contrast to perhaps a belief or a suggestion that the human condition is insoluble, it's immutable, it's inchangeable, that perhaps it's intrinsic, it's part of our genetic makeup, our instinctual makeup. Whereas the use of this word solves the human condition is putting this emphasis on the fact that, if you like, there's this suggestion that the human condition is a product of a lack of knowledge, a lack of insight. And the logical implication of that is that if insight or understanding can be brought to bear on that issue, then it is soluble, that it is solvable. And for me, if you like, this sets out that what this interview is about is in the domain of logic, of knowledge, of making sense of a problem. It's not about managing it. And also importantly, it's not suggesting that it just examines the issue or explores it is actually saying that it solves it, that it actually finds a root cause of that problem and actually brings in a sense, a new understanding or insight has been able to be synthesized and brought to bear on that problem such that it can actually be resolved. And as I said, it's communicating that this issue of the human condition is not insoluble, it's not impregnable. And as I said, it suggests that, in fact, the cause of that condition is simply a lack of understanding or lack of knowledge. So I think that's giving us a lot of information about what domain this topic or this interview is actually working in. Then what I think is significant, it draws this very strong connection between solving the human condition and saving the world. And what I think is significant there is that obviously in day to day, there's a lot of emphasis on what I'm going to call the symptoms of the human condition. Whereas this title is making it very clear that the threat, if you like, to humanity is not any number of those symptoms. It's saying that the real threat here is the human condition. And it's drawing the connection, between the fact that if we don't come through the gate of actually addressing the human condition, then humanity and the planet, if you like, are in peril. So there's just this emphasis on the significance of this issue of the human condition, rather than an emphasis on the symptoms that, day to day are where we focus on in terms of trying to resolve or mitigate those problems. Whereas for me, what's significant here is this interview, the title of this interview is saying, no. To the extent there's a problem or we need to save the world, the key to doing that is resolution of the human condition. Moving on to the second element, which is the quote, as I said, from the late Professor Harry Prozan. The quote read, "The," in uppercase, again with that emphasis, "most important interview of all time." So again, a very direct, impacting statement. He's certainly not mincing his words in terms of what Professor Prozan saw as the significance of this interview. And again, what I suppose I want to do is step back and say, well, if we start to accept what's already been set out in the title, that the human condition can be solved, is a function of a lack of knowledge, that it's not immutable, that it is actually solvable. If we accept that the proposition that the human condition is the key threat to a meaningful future for humanity, and then if we entertain the prospect that this interview actually explains the human condition and therefore saves the world, what I'm trying to get at is that though it's easy to put all those propositions, just dismiss them or not entertain them seriously, but if you do that, if you do entertain them, if you do accept them, and you follow the line of logic, the connection between each of those propositions, what I'm trying to get at is there is a sound and rational basis for that quote or that statement that the late Professor Harry Prozan made, that being the most important interview of all time. Because obviously enough, if you accept those propositions, then that would be a reasonable, sound assessment of the situation, that is actually how significant this interview is, that it is actually going to be the most important interview of all time. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is not only for me does the text on the cover of this booklet set out the outcomes or what it is that this interview is professing to have done, but if you stop and actually look at what the structure of it, what's actually being communicated, there is a basis to follow that, to take it seriously, and obviously then to engage with it. And in that sense, if you move on to the third element of it, which is the commentary at the bottom here, it's obviously a bit hard to read. There's a lot in it as well, but there's just two particular elements that I wanted to pick up on. And the first one is where it makes reference to understanding of the core mystery and problem about human behaviour, of our so-called good and evil stricken human condition. Now, what for me is significant there again is there's this emphasis on the fact that we're in the domain of understanding here, of making sense of, that this is an issue that has been solved. So it's not about applying a dogma or applying a better tool for managing our condition. It's actually saying that we're going to bring our fully conscious, our intellectual capacity, our ability to test information, knowledge, explanation against a particular problem and work out, does it in fact solve it? I think the second element is it's picking up this idea that our condition, if you like, it's a core mystery. And I think even though, if you like, the human condition is a forbidden topic, I think all of us would agree that this human condition as defined here, our capacity for good and evil, is the core mystery. It is the most perplexing, bewildering aspect of our behaviour. And I think beyond that, we would agree that it is that capacity that is the root cause of all the human suffering and conflict that we see around us. So there's this, for me, it's setting out this sequence of propositions that we can run with, if you like, and it's providing a basis for the significance that's been asserted above in the quote and the title. And in that sense, like I just said, it's setting out that we're in the domain of understanding, of making sense of our condition, of bringing insight to it. It's reinforcing that notion that our condition is actually a product of a lack of insight or a lack of knowledge, and therefore it flows that if we can bring insight to it, it is actually resolvable. It's not immutable. And I think, as I said, it's providing this sound or logical basis for the propositions that are made above as to how it is that it produces these particular outcomes. And that probably links to the last little element in the commentary that I wanted to talk about, and that was where it makes reference to completely redeeming, uplifting, and healing understanding. And there's a couple of elements in that are really important for me. The first of all is that in using the words redeeming and uplifting, it's picking up this idea or giving this message that our condition is a psychological one. That if you like, it's not innate, it's not genetic, it's not instinctive. It's actually a product of it's associated with or connected with our fully conscious faculty or mind. And by virtue of it being, if you like, giving this idea that it's psychological, that it's a lack of knowledge about who we are, it's giving this, I suppose, it's giving, in that sense, a very positive message that if we can bring insight to bear on it, then it is healable, it is solvable. Whereas obviously if it was innate, if it was genetic, as obviously, there can be a prevailing view out there that that our human condition is genetic, it is rooted within our genes. That is obviously unhealable, if you like. Then we're in the domain of having to manage it. Whereas what I think is significant here is that it is saying this is psychological, therefore it is healable. And secondly, it's obviously picks up this idea that redeeming and uplifting, it's suggesting that for me, it's as though we've been living with this chronic insecurity about our fundamental self-worth. And through this explanation, this solution, it's actually the way it's redeeming or uplifting is because what it's revealing, if you like, is that we are actually fundamentally worthwhile. And that's what actually redeems us or uplifts us and actually allows us to heal. So putting all that together, for me, what's relevant is, I suppose I just want to communicate for me that yes, there are these significant claims that are made on the front, just within the text of the front cover of this book, as to what it is that proclaims significance of this booklet. But if you slow down and look more closely, you can actually gain insight into how it is that can actually be delivered, how it delivers on that promise to be the interview or the most important interview of all time. And I think lastly, what's most significant is it's not a case of taking my word for it. As I've stressed a couple of times, we're in the domain of understanding, of making sense of using our fully conscious mind, our intellectual capacity to assess knowledge, to assess that explanation or proposed understanding of our human condition. And I suggest that with patience and perseverance and actually, if you like, getting familiar with the framework of explanation that's being put forward, that you actually go on a journey and you arrive at a position where you yourself can actually experience the truth, or if you like, the solid foundation to the claims that are made on the front of the booklet. And importantly, this is not just an intellectual or philosophical exercise either. What's so significant here is that solution or explanation of the human condition actually changes profoundly how we feel about ourselves, how we think, how we perceive our fundamental worth, our relationship with other people, with other races, and that then results in a change in our behaviour, and then in turn produces a change or an end to the conflict and suffering. So this isn't, as I say, a philosophical or intellectual process. We actually experience a change in us as a result of digesting and processing this information and recognising its accountability. And then, as I say, we go on a journey and we can actually, if you like, validate what's being said or what's being described on the front of this booklet in ourselves, in our own life experience. And I think that's something very fundamental, and it links with my key point, which is this is all about making sense of our condition. And obviously enough, it's an incredibly inspirational outcome that's being proposed. There's talk of it being an astonishing, world-changing and world-saving interview. As I mentioned, there's the redeeming, uplifting, healing understanding. And I just really encourage you, if you're not familiar with it, not just to take those claims on face value, but actually take them, just step back from them, take them seriously, open your mind to the prospect of them being true, and then engage with it, as I say, with patience and perseverance, and test them for yourselves. So anyway, hopefully that's of some help, and I just wanted to share that with you. Thanks very much.